Hello, welcome, please come in. Our magic list journey has reached its inevitable conclusion, and we have arrived at our final destination, where I will talk about all the runs we just went through, and do some light comparisons to see how these different runs felt to do. These runs were really interesting, definitely kind of a mess, both because of the mechanical systems in some of these games, and because of how integral, or not, magic is to the play experience. I also had to be a bit fast and loose with the definition of what no magic even meant. I mean, why was enemy skill allowed in FF7, but summons weren't? Why did I say no to the magic command and the GF command in 8? And the answer mostly amounts to what was more interesting for me. Summons in FF7 are just way too strong, but enemy skills are fun and interesting. And GF summoning in 8 is just a waste of time. And I will admit that the series was probably the messiest series of runs, because the mechanics in these games really did not match each other in some very, key ways. But the series is over, and I still get to talk about it, so let's dive in and start with difficulty. And I start at the beginning with Final Fantasy II, which gets to be immediately slotted into last place. Because, yeah, this game was absolutely the easiest. I mean, there was definitely another game on this list that was in pretty stiff competition for easiest experience. Don't want to spoil it by getting too ahead of myself. But FF2 does manage to take the cake of easiest runs to complete, and it's not just because it could be made easy, it's that it was almost brainlessly easy. I recall in the magic-only run that it was pretty simple, mostly just prioritize some light buffs and then unleash attacking spells. And everyone could heal, so that proved not too difficult outside of a few particularly difficult fights. But then I played the game without magic, and I was legitimately shocked at how easy it is. Equip best weapon you can get, attack, win. That's it. There are no strategies you really need to employ. You don't need to know anything to easily beat this game. It really is just press X to win, which was legitimately very surprising. Magic isn't only completely unnecessary, it's actively a trap. Any time you spend casting spells is a waste of time. And yeah, there was a point at the beginning where the first boss was a bit difficult, and I was a bit worried about the challenge. And then I leveled up, very slightly, and that was it. The game was over, fundamentally broken by doing nothing interesting. And that's really why this game snags the easiest slot. It just takes nothing to do. That's actually why the video was only 15 minutes long. I didn't know what to talk about. Next up, I fought a boss by clicking X until it died. I don't even remember how strong healing items are in this game. Did I even use them? So, interesting fact about this game is that you can buy magic tomes and use them from your inventory to cast a mid-level version of the spell. Despite that technically falling within the rules, I had gone into the run intending not to do that. Felt like it cheapened the challenge. But then I actually started the challenge, and it literally never came up. I didn't even mention it in the script for that video because, who cares? Oh, I didn't waste my time using an item that doesn't matter to make an already easy run honestly probably more difficult by wasting money and dealing less damage. So yeah, FF2 gets last place. It could be a bit of a toss-up between this and FF8, which I'll get to in a bit, but ultimately the ease with which you can beat this game really says it all. You don't have to try to break the game, it was broken before you got there. FF6, how's it going? How's your difficulty feeling? You like second place? Tough, second place is what you get. Yeah, FF6 does lose out to the top contender. It's not by much, both of the top two games are pretty close to the top in the difficulty ranking, which, to be clear, does not mean they were difficult. It just means top difficulty of the games I played. For the first third or so of the game, it's basically a normal playthrough. The only difference is that Terra and Celeste can't use magic, making them both notably weaker than a casual run. However, Terra still has decent equipment and stats for physical combat, and Celeste's runic ability is still very useful. The biggest issue throughout the entire run was healing. I mean, whose idea was it to make high potions only cure 250 HP, and potions only cure 50? That's just stupid, especially in a game where healing magic is so accessible. I've mocked FF5 a lot for how badly it paces out access to healing items, which, to be fair, it does, but FF6 is actually worse. A lot worse. You get access to high potions almost immediately, so why do potions even exist? And 250 is a comically small amount of healing. You may not get high potions until kind of late in FF5, but at least they cure 500 HP. I quickly started using high potions only to heal outside combat, and even then it was really annoying to do so. Gotta get my party healed up, guess I'll expend 30 potions. Like, why? I think I'm starting to understand why gamers have such a problem using consumable items, because they are a trap. Anyway, back to talking about difficulty rather than ranting about items. The nice thing is that each character in this game has a unique ability that makes them stand out more than some other Final Fantasies, and these abilities generally start off useful and scale pretty well. Celeste's Runic can stop enemy spellcasting, Sabin can use blitzes to deal big damage or even heal, Strago can replace spellcasting with lore abilities, and Realm can be a waste of a party slot with her sketch ability. From the moment I acquired them, a lot of these abilities really stood in for spellcasting. The game did get more difficult as it went on, too. The fights in Kefka's tower were generally all interesting, with a lot of nonsense and close calls. And Kefka himself was fairly tricky, which was a nice change. I think it comes down to unique abilities scaling well, while magic generally scales stupidly strong. Shadow or Gogo can throw a shuriken at endgame to deal 3,000 to 4,000, which is good, but Ultima can deal max damage to all enemies and costs 1 MP. So 6 definitely would win the award for best difficulty curve of these challenges, but that's not actually what I'm talking about. So, while this game is more difficult than some others, it doesn't quite manage to reach the top slot, losing to one other game. Speaking of the game FF6 lost to, FF7. Here to take the top slot, and it's pretty easy to see why. Unlike FF6, FF7 does not have unique commands for each character. Rather, command materia and limit break serve a similar niche, and while there are some really nice command materia, you get a lot of them very late. I mean, the only command materia that's actually useful that you can get before basically the end of the game is enemy skill, which, to its credit, is very strong, because enemy skills, blue magic, lores, whatever you want to call them, are always very strong. But all the other useful skills are locked near the end of Disc 2. Double Cut, Slash All, W Item, all of them are basically end game materia, and without those you really only have enemy skills to rely on. They did, finally, do a better job with items. Potions cure a decent chunk of HP, high potions are available early-ish, but also cure a decent amount, and as soon as you get the Tiny Bronco, you can load up on X potions and Phoenix Downs, which never run out of usability. This game also has a lot of customization available via the support and independent materia you get, which again, many of the most useful and interesting materia are found later in the game than I'd prefer, but fine, I guess. But not being able to use magic to generally heal and cast buffs really hurt my survivability. Enemy skill can do that to a degree, but enemy skills are very expensive and often overkill. But that's all you have. Come to think of it, did I get a game over in any boss in any other games? I had a few in FF7. The fire motorcycle thing, grabby hands. Not sure, but FF7 might be the only game where I game over to a boss and not like stupidly because I wasn't paying attention, because I know that happened. So yeah, it definitely was the hardest of the games. Again, not actually difficult, just more difficult. The only part that kind of fell apart was right at the end. I remember early on wondering why weapon attacks were dealing so little damage, because I remembered weapon attacks being more useful. And then I reached near endgame and realized why I remembered that. Because a combination of endgame weapons, along with Slash All and Double Cut, broke the difficulty of the game completely right near the end, even up through the final boss. Enemy skill had been doing a lot of heavy lifting in the playthrough, but I barely used it in the final boss fights. The only interesting thing I did was break the boss animations, somehow. I mean, I used Big Guard and White Wind against Safer Sephiroth, but Big Guard was completely pointless, and White Wind was a misclick. A Mega Elixir would have been way more useful. Despite the endgame difficulty collapse, FF7 still gets to be in the top slot for difficulty, but it is on the thinnest sheet of ice I have ever seen. Onwards! And having fallen through the ice into the ocean bed below, I arrive at FF8, which gets to sit comfortably in second to last place. And I did consider putting this in last place instead of FF2, but ultimately I think FF8 is just a bit more difficult, mostly because it actually takes work to break FF8. Or maybe work is the wrong word, maybe it is more accurate to call it game knowledge, because it's not like it took no effort to break this game. It's more that the tools were all arrayed in front of me and I couldn't help but break the game fundamentally. And that was ultimately why I chose FF2 as the easiest of the two runs, because where FF2 the answer was equip big sword, FF8 took a decent amount of work to break the game completely. Played some cards, junction stuff to my HP, used level up to get access to higher level spells easier than you really should be able to. And yes, the final result of that was a comically easy mess of a playthrough, but at least felt like more effort went into it here than in FF2. But I also can't possibly place it any higher in the list because, well, 6 and 7 had actual sections that were difficult. And 8 did not. So it gets to sit comfortably in second to last, and I don't need any sass from 8 on this. It's only this high because it reached the ocean floor, but declined to start digging. And that brings us to the recommended section, where I recommend, or don't, these challenges. And I will start with FF2 as the first game in the series. And the question is, where would I put FF2 in my ranking of recommendations? And it gets to go in last place. Woo! But that shouldn't really surprise anyone who saw the video or listened to the difficulty section. This is absolutely the lowest on this ranking, and the biggest reason for such a low placement is just that it isn't that interesting. Magic is such an underwhelming option in this game, and just not using it at all is honestly just the best way to play the game. Physical attacks are just so strong, and while there are a few points where physical attacks start to trail behind a bit, it never really reaches the point of being actually interesting. Mostly because you also don't have any meaningful options. Equip the best weapon, press attack until everything dies. If that doesn't work, you kind of just need to grind up some additional stats. There just isn't enough depth to the combat in this game. Which is kind of true regardless of how you are playing, but it really comes to the forefront in a challenge where you can't use magic and are solely restricted to physical attacks. Being an early NES game really hinders the variety of combat the developers could deliver on. And they tried, they really did, but those limits were pretty significant. And while the game has been ported with improved graphics and more streamlined mechanics, the fundamental systems underlying that have never actually changed in a meaningful way. And it shows. So FF2 gets to be placed in last on recommendation. There just isn't enough here to make the run difficult or interesting. It doesn't even take very long to do because you don't ever have to worry about spells. Goodbye FF2. Maybe someday you'll manage to earn better than last. And next up is FF6, which had about 6 years to improve on the flaws of FF2. And how did it do? Well, it gets the top spot. FF6 without magic is actually my favorite of the 4 runs I completed, and there are a couple of reasons why the game was able to completely surpass the other games. The difficulty is one of them. While 6 was not the most difficult, it was tricky in some places. And it also escalated in difficulty, starting off fairly easy, pretty consistent with a casual playthrough, before escalating as it reached endgame. I love a good difficulty curve in a challenge run. It's important to keep the run feeling fresh, especially in a Final Fantasy that can last a dozen hours. And even beyond the difficulty, the run stands out for what it offers over a casual playthrough. One of the fundamental issues about FF6 is that every character has a unique mechanic. Throw, tools, blitz, but they all get drastically overshadowed by the sheer power magic provides. Why would I bother throwing shurikens when Ultima exists? Why use White Wind when Curaga is a thing? A casual playthrough really suffers by making each character feel unique, and then making that uniqueness irrelevant. But there really isn't any of that in a no magic run. Without magic, you need to think about how to heal the party, such as through chakra or White Wind. How are you going to deal damage, throw, drill? Each character brings a unique skill to the table, and it's really impactful. And yeah, not every character is super useful. Terran Realms suffer by not being able to take advantage of their high magic stat. But it's kind of telling how impactful this is when you compare my magic only and no magic runs. In magic only, I only used the 4 characters with a high magic stat, or Edgar, because I couldn't be bothered. And in no magic, I used, well, almost everyone. I only executed Kayan and Gao because I couldn't be bothered, and 12 is really as many characters as you can use in 3 parties. And every character was useful in a unique way, other than Realm. I guess because Sketch is kind of trash. And it's really fun to experience the game actually using the characters' unique abilities. And one high point to another, because FF7 actually also manages to reach the heights of, well, second place. And it ultimately comes down to the fact that the characters in FF7 just aren't quite as distinct as they are in FF6. Which, to be fair, does have many advantages. But when I can't use magic or summons, that lack of distinct characterization in combat, combined with how long the game makes you wait for a decent variety of command materia, means the combat can feel a little boring. I mean, maybe boring isn't the right word. Samey? Is that what I'm getting at? Each character has different stats, but not that different, and different limit breaks, but again, not that different. I think the reason that FF7 falls behind FF6 is that removing magic from FF6 gave each character a chance to shine and show off their unique ability. And the characters in FF7 just don't feel that unique or interesting, and that's kind of a bummer. I think the interchangeability of characters in FF7 generally does a lot to spotlight the complexity and interesting mechanics available in the materia system, but when you strip away so much of that, you end up with a kind of disappointing mess. There's just not that much to lean back on, and then we get to the end game where FF7 kind of falls apart. Enemy skill was a pretty significant carry early on in the game, but by the mid to late game it became increasingly less relevant. Why use White Wind when X potions are so easily obtained? Why use Big Guard when the enemies don't deal enough damage to be a threat anyway? Why use Pandora's Box when Slash All deals more damage and doesn't break boss animations? I mean, I went to the final boss fight with basic attacks dealing more damage than spells, and 11 Mega Elixirs, which ended up being 9 more than I actually needed. So a lot of the challenge and interest in the FF7 run was really front-loaded. Disc 1 was top tier, Disc 2 was less so, and Disc 3 was fine, I guess. And then comes FF8, which, much like in difficulty, gets to slide directly into second to last place. And honestly, mostly for the same reasons it was placed there on difficulty. FF8 is just such a beautiful disaster. I mean, the junction system is weird and confusing at first glance, but it's also comically breakable in every way that matters. High HP junctions, accessing magic earlier than you really should be able to because of the card mod ability. It's just, full disclosure, I first played this game when I was like 8 or 9, I think. So now that I am considerably older, I absolutely cannot recall to any degree what a first-time playthrough of this game is actually like, so I have no idea how difficult or fun this game is or isn't to someone who doesn't understand the systems at play here very deeply. And yeah, there is a degree of fun in understanding the game's mechanics enough to absolutely destroy them from start to finish, but that doesn't make a great challenge run, because it is not a challenge. And while a seemingly obvious cheat code can be fun, it doesn't really make the game's systems that interesting. So while I will always have a soft spot for FF8 and really enjoy the game's design, I can't pretend that it's not an absolute mess in many key ways. So it doesn't earn the last spot, mostly because FF2 is just so easy to break and so boring to do so. FF8 doesn't manage to stay above second to last. And that is it. No magic, and often no summon, run-throughs of a handful of Final Fantasy games, and the results were honestly pretty close to what I expected. But it was fun in some cases, and certainly interesting in others, so while it wasn't especially challenging, even at the worst of times, I am glad I did it. But that is it for this series. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.